Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rachel Starbuck from the Business Review, and I will be your host. It is our pleasure to have LTS Loam and Therapie-Systemes with us today, who will be discussing oral thin films, new opportunities for oral drug delivery. Today's guest speakers are Rick Chan, PhD, who is Vice President of Research and Development, and Dr. Iris Schnitzler, who is responsible for marketing and sales intelligence. I'd like to welcome you to our new webinar platform. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect, please click on the link that you received via email to rejoin. You may move and resize the windows on your screen to customize your view. All of the icons along the bottom of your screen are the interactive widgets that we have on offer today, so please interact with them all throughout the session. We also have a survey for you at the end of the webinar. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen, or please use the top left-hand box. We will allocate around 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. Please use the help widget if you experience any technical difficulties or require any more assistance. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome Iris.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. Let's start today's webinar with a short introduction of our company. LTS was founded in 1984. Since then, LTS has gained extensive experience in two main technology platforms, the transdermal systems and the oral thin film. Here we provide contract development and contract manufacturing services. LTS owns more than 300 patent families, resulting in about 3,000 individual patents. Currently, we are very active with 30 cooperation projects. For those of you less familiar with LTS, we operate two sites. Our headquarters is located in Andernach, Germany, and our US facility in West Caldwell, New Jersey. We have a total staff of around 1,200 people, and last year we generated sales of 311 million euros. Oral thin films are one of our technology platforms. LTS has gained practical experience with a fairly large variety of active substances, treating several indications including allergy, breakthrough cancer pain, cough and cold, migraine, smoking cessation, and vomiting nausea. We perceive ourselves as a full-service partner for the pharmaceutical industry. We offer all services from feasibility studies to the manufacture of global supply. Please allow me to introduce my colleague Rick Chan. He will proceed with the scientific part of this presentation.
Thank you, Iris. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for some of those who stay up late in the evening in the Asia-Pacific region. Really appreciate your participation. Later on, I'm going to talk about the transmucosal drug delivery, giving you a bit of overview about the nature of the technology, and then the oral thin film itself, and then Iris will come back to talk about the market and product, and I will finish off by giving you some case studies on the absorption kinetics and some of the challenges that we face in oral thin films. Before I do that, I'd like to pass on to Rachel just to have a sense of, what is your knowledge about the transmucosal delivery. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much. So for your first poll question, do you or does your company have any experience in transmucosal drug delivery? And if yes, which kind of products do you have? So your answers are from A, yes, transmucosal sprays, B, yes, transmucosal lozenges, C, yes, transmucosal films, D, yes, others, or E, no, but sublingual tablets, or F, no. So what are you expecting from this question, Rick?
I'm just looking at the general knowledge about people in this area, so I can actually help modulate in terms of the explanation of some of the technology behind it. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see what people's experiences are.
Okay, thank you very much. So it looks like, yes, transmucosal films has got 45.6%. So are these interesting results for you?
Well, I'm actually very surprised. So I'm talking to a very experienced audience. So that's good. And so let's move on with that. Let's go to the next slide, and we're talking about just giving you an overview about the oral cavity itself. Really, there are three key areas. One is what we call the masticatory mucosa, extensively keratinized epithelium, which has about 25% of the surface area of the oral cavity. Typically, these are the gingiva and the hard palate. Then the lining mucosa is the one that is really of most interest to in terms of a transmucosal delivery. This is the buccal cheek itself, the sublingual tissues, mainly on the non-keratinized epithelium, and has the largest surface area. And then thirdly is their specialized mucosa, and these are, you know, like the tongue, which contains both types of epithelium. So if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, and you might not see it very clearly, but it just gives you a sense of, with the keratinized, how tightly packed the epithelial tissues are as compared to that of the non-keratinized that appears at the bottom of the page. Mike Repka, or rather Professor Repka, has done a very good job in illustrating this. So in terms of the transport of drugs across the transmucosal membrane, the two major routes. The first one is the transcellular, where the drugs actually move across the cell membrane and then move across to the other side, to the basolateral side. Typically is espoused that this is more for the lipophilic molecules. And then there is also the paracellular transporting route, where it's in between the junctions and is the hydrophilic molecules. And typically in the normal situation, all these tight junctions are very, very tight, and that's one of the nature of the buccal cavity, and that prevents materials to getting into. So when you deal with transmucosal delivery, one of the opportunity is how do you actually open the tight junctions. So some of the key factors affecting the transmucosal absorption is obviously the ionization of the drug. I talk about the lipophilic molecule in the transcellular. So the lipophilicity, both kind of making it in terms of the non-ionized species to move across, and that certainly would help. Size of the molecules, we know that it also works very well. Small molecules like nicotine move across the buccal membrane very, very easily. Salivary flow and the volume and the pH of the oral cavity has a major influence. This is not surprising, because if you have any stimulant in the oral cavity, basically you stimulate the salivary flow, and your oral cavity can only hold so much volume of fluid, and anything will be drained into the gastric intestinal system. In most instances, where the drug have no issue with regard to hepatic first pass, that obviously is not an issue. But if you do have a drug that get absorbed and experience first pass effect, that is very detrimental to that. The residence time really talks about how much time the drug is allowed to stay in the buccal cavity to move across. And the site of administration, obviously the gingiva and the palate are more difficult for the drug to move across because of the keratinized nature of the epithelium. So all those factor into how you design your transmucosal system and also where you apply it. So moving on, the next one is really the advantages of the buccal delivery. I talked about it earlier on. A key component is really it avoids the hepatic first-pass effect, and therefore it does allow the potentially fast onset of action being possible, and also an increased bioavailability. With drugs that actually the absorption is affected by food and in the stomach, and obviously the transmucosal route does not have that issue and potentially reduces the plasma level variability. And this is important if you have narrow therapeutic windows for the drug. Delivery of acid-labile drugs, that's I think is self-explanatory. Drugs that are acid-labile, when you go to the stomach, it will just degrade. So again, it offers an opportunity in the context. Application in the drug with the short half-life, this is a real opportunity, how you modulate the absorption kinetic. So this is certainly offer a big opportunity in the drug absorption. One of the key things with this is because this is a very novel dose form and it potentially improve patients' compliance. People find it hard to swallow. That no longer presents an issue for them. And this is particularly important if you have post-operative conditions where nausea prevails and also swallowing in the, for the geriatric population. So this would certainly help improve the patient's intake of the drug. So just change the scene a little bit and just giving you a quick overview about the oral thin films. What it is obviously is an edible dose form and is very adaptable design, and I'll go into that a little bit in detail later on. It's really very much comprises of both hydrophilic and lipophilic polymers. And typically you would have a mixture of those to improve both your processability and also in terms of the oral organoleptic characters. Typically it contains drug. It can be an amorphous in solution form, or it can be the crystalline, the material that we commonly encounter for a lot of insoluble drugs. The production is really adaptation from transdermal manufacturing, and it's doing by high volume coating, and then you slit, and then subsequently you punch the desired dose forms and pouch it accordingly. So I talked about the oral thin film. So it typically has the film formers. Typically, I said is a blend, and it can be a single or a multi-layer design, and they are very functional specific layers. A lot depends on how you promote or retard the absorption kinetics. So the different types of polymer will be chosen as a consequence. In some instances where you might have incompatibility of drugs with some of your excipients, the multi-layer design also offer the protection as it appears. Plasticizer and the filler, and this is primarily help to make up the bulk of the oral thin film, no different from the lactose in a tablet, and the plasticizer is just aid the processability and also the subsequent handling. If you imagine some of the polymers, and if you don't have the plasticizers, they becomes very fragile and it becomes very difficult to process. Taste masking agents and flavors that are very typical, and most of the pharmaceuticals are bitter, so the taste masking agents are almost mandatory in many instances. pH controlling substances, this is a way by which you have your buffering agents to how do you actually maximize your delivery of non-ionized species through the Henderson-Hasselbalch equations. And then finally the colorant, just to make it more appealing, and also in terms of the handling from the pouches. And these can be individually packed or packed in a multiple pack, like the Listerine pocket pack for some of you who may be familiar with it, or some of the breath freshening packs. Okay, the next topic is really just very quickly giving an overview of how all thin films are manufactured, and this is just one way of manufacturing, and by far the most popular way being used. Is really preparing a coating mass of the blend of the polymer and all the ingredients that I kind of talked about. So you end up having a solution or a suspension, and then this is being coated on the process liner. And then this goes through a huge drying tunnel at variable speed and varying drying conditions to actually maximize the removal of water or solvents used in the mixture. And subsequently, the master roll coming out from the drying oven is conditioned, and then it was slit and punched into individual forms. And most instances is packed in the blisters and in aluminum pouches. And by far, the aluminum pouches is really the packaging material of choice. So what are the different types of OTF? Just a very quick introduction here. Typically, you have what we call fast disintegrating film. This is like most of the breath fresheners, where you require a burst of the API or the burst of the breath freshening ingredients like the eucalyptus and some other stuff, essential oils. And then you have the melt-away film, which typically just put it on the tongue and then it dissolves sort of gradually, but it's still within a reasonable time. And this is by far the most commonly used way of presentation. And finally is the non-disintegrating buccal film. This is what I call almost like a buccal patch, where it adheres to the buccal cavity, or in some cases in gingiva. Really, again, depends on the application of the API, and this is basically designed to stick with the buccal cheek for a period of time, some maybe 30 minutes, some maybe an hour. A lot depends on applications to deliver really the application required. And this is the point that I'm talking about in how it modulates the absorption kinetics. So if we go into a little bit more in detail in terms of the fast disintegrating film, typically is the highly soluble, very soluble hydrophilic polymers, where you either have the solution or the suspension, and typically dissolve within seconds, giving a very good mouthfeel. And because of the nature of its rapid solution, you actually potentially get a rapid onset of action via the buccal and the sublingual absorption. For drugs which does not offer the permeability across the transmucosal membrane, of course, will be swallowed, and in that case, then you really offer no additional benefit to the patient. So then that would become a straightforward GI absorption, just like a tablet or capsule. The melt-away film, as is a single or multilayer, still very much a soluble polymer. It just adheres to the cheek or the gingivas and dissolves very quickly between 5 seconds to about 30 seconds. So this is a very quick way of delivering the API. And finally, I talked about the non-disintegrating film. This is typically a multi-layer film of structure, combination of soluble and insoluble polymer, and again, a lot depends on the design. If you wanted a bilateral release of a drug, then obviously you choose a slightly insoluble polymer, but some people, depending on application, would go for only a unilateral release, and that would typically use as a highly insoluble polymer blend like backing. So this adheres to the buccal cheek, and basically the drugs gradually diffuse across the transmucosal membrane. So if you look at the absorption kinetics, and this is obviously a graphical representation, and it varies a little bit depending on the type of API. Fast disintegrating buccal film, you typically have a very, very early spike of the peak, and then it falls off. Multilayer, as I said, is more the typical profile. And instead of being your Tmax being a 1 to 2 hours, sometimes it offers the opportunity of reducing that Tmax. The non-disintegrating buccal film typically is used as very much as a control release formulation, and it will, depending on the structure, you may be able to get a rapid onset and then a constant release of the API through the buccal membrane. So that's a quick introduction about some of the characteristics of the oral thin film. I now hand over to Iris to talk about some of the opportunities from a marketing perspective.
Thank you, Rick. Let's have a look at the global RX market. There is a total of 9 marketed oral thin film products. The first prescription product was Insoluble, which was launched in 2009. Last year, the OTFs generated a total sales of approximately $1.38 billion. It is noteworthy, however, that the bulk of the sales, namely 99%, was generated by only one product, the Suboxone film. Before discussing individual case studies, let me list the product indications available today. They comprise Alzheimer's disease, breakthrough pain, erectile dysfunction, migraine, opioid dependence, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, sleeping disorders, and vomiting nausea. Our first case study highlights Suboxone film. The Suboxone film is a prescription medicine used for the maintenance treatment of opioid dependence. It contains a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone in a ratio of 4:1. Originally, the film was developed as a life cycle management product for the Suboxone tablets. This leads us now to the history of the Suboxone film. Suboxone sublingual film was launched by Reckitt Benckiser in the US in the second half of 2010. The same year, the patent of Suboxone tablets expired. By 2012, the sublingual film was able to achieve 55% of the share of the buprenorphine naloxone market in the US. In 2012, Suboxone tablets were discontinued on the US market. Today, the Suboxone film is the most preferred and prescribed dosage form for the administration of buprenorphine naloxone in the US and in Australia. Starting in 2010, sales increased within 5 years from $69 million to around $1.4 billion in 2014. And this is not the end of the story. The launch of the Suboxone film in Europe is expected for 2016. Our second case study deals with the product Insoluble buccal. Insoluble buccal is a fentanyl buccal soluble film used for the management of breakthrough pain in opioid-tolerant adult patients with cancer. The objective of the product development was to avoid tablet abuse and a fast onset of action compared to tablets and patches. Insoluble, developed by Biodelivery Sciences International, was the first prescription drug in the form of a film. In 2009, it was launched in the US by Meda. The launch in Canada took place in 2011. In Europe under the brand name buccal, also by Meda in 2012. In 2012, the distribution of the drug was temporarily suspended in the US. The relaunch is now expected for the end of 2015. Looking at the current sales figures, it is clear that we are talking about a niche product. However, sales went up between 2013 and 2014 by about 500%. Again, it has to be highlighted that we are only talking about European sales in the time period 2013-2014. We expect sales volumes to increase sharply starting in 2016. On the next slide, we would like to indicate the potential of transmucosal dosage forms within the fentanyl product. In the chart, the total sales of fentanyl products are shown in dark gray. The sales of fentanyl transdermal patches are illustrated in light gray. Also showing falling sales figures in the last 5 years, it should be noted that transdermal patches are still a very important dosage form for fentanyl. The green bar totalizes the sales of the 3 biggest transmucosal products on the market. Abstral, a fentanyl sublingual tablet, Actic, fentanyl oral transmucosal lozenges, and Subsys, a fentanyl sublingual spray. Within the last 5 years, these 3 products have gained a market share of 25% of the total fentanyl market. On Zolis, Racul is shown in red. It can be concluded that the advantages of transmucosal products are well accepted, but the potential of the transmucosal films has not yet been fully exploited. And now, Rachel, please proceed with our second call.
Okay, thank you very much. So is there an API within your company's portfolio which you could potentially consider for transmucosal delivery? And your answers are from A, yes, B, no, or C, I don't know. So what are you expecting from this question, Rick?
Yeah, I'm just hoping to have a gauge in terms of, where everybody's thinking and also the opportunity that we may be able to see application for those molecules in a new route of administration as product lifecycle management, or in the case of some NCEs, where there is bioavailability issues and people may not be aware of. And that's another opportunity by which we can maximize the drug exposure, reducing the cost of treatment. So I just wanted to have a sense of that.
Okay, and let's find out. So yes has got 52%. Are these interesting results for you?
Absolutely, and I look forward to connecting with people with regard to this possible collaboration. So hopefully this webinar will give them an opportunity to think a little bit more about their molecules and how do they want to have a desired drug profiles and maximize the benefit that both the transmucosal route offers and that of the API for effective treatment. So, thank you, Rachel. So let me move on to case study 3. This is just giving you an example about delivering fast onset of action. I apologize with the number of curves that we have here, but this is all provided in good faith by our sponsors, so it's very difficult for me to tease out some of the others. On the left-hand side is the Cmax that unfortunately the scale got cut off. So on the x-axis is obviously the time course here. So if you look at the way I pointed out with the innovator tablet, so this is the attempt of one of our sponsors to look at how mimicking the innovator tablet as a bioequivalent product. So obviously you can see the innovator tablet with the Tmax around about 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and the Cmax. And if you look at one of the film formulation, which is the one that I pointed, and slightly to the left, a little bit darker green to that of the innovator tablet, it actually achieved the same Cmax. But surprisingly, if you look at the AUC, it kind of looked half that amount of that of the innovator tablet. I kind of draw, and I don't know about whether this drug, whether it is the Cmax, or rather the concentration, drug concentration, is more important as against the AUC. But I just draw a line at the 400 nanogram per mil, and just to give you a sense, with the innovator tablet, the duration of action falls roughly just short of 4 hours. And if you look at the oral thin film that was tested, it was a shade under 2 hours. So it's literally half the amount of time that is kind of sustained for the therapeutic level. And it's not surprising when we go to the next slide and I tell you that, well, yeah, we have a similar Cmax, but a lower Tmax for the fast-acting for the film. And the AUC is roughly 55% that of the innovator's tablet. So what we done was actually achieve the same Cmax with half the dose required. What it means is reduce the drug exposure and effectively reduce the cost of treatment. And I don't know about the side effect of this particular compound, but potentially, if the side effect is related to either the Cmax or the AUC, you straight away you say, well, it'll reduce the side effect impact as well. And obviously, if you look at the curves, the upslope in the first hour, there is a faster absorption by the film of the drug by the film as against that of the tablet. So again, if the Cmax is, or if the plasma concentration is important, then obviously it's showing that it has a fast onset of action as well. I talked about the red line, and the duration of action is kind of like half. So again, if this application is very suitable for any episodic treatment. So if you think about, if I have a headache, I don't need to have a drug that lingers on for 4 hours, so on and so forth, and I can have the tablet, or rather the thin film. I can fix up my headache in a very short space of time, and also it wears off its effect in 2 hours in this particular instance, and therefore I don't need to worry about having a drug in the system, so to speak. So just giving you a snapshot of the fast action possibility. The next one is really looking at a very elegant work done by one of our sponsors. They were very interested in looking at the kinetics in the different oral cavity site. So just to give you a sense, I must apologize I didn't explain the other drug in case study 3. I listed out some of the physical chemical characteristics of the drug just to give you a sense of the solubility of the drug itself, lipophilicity, and the size of the molecule. So in case study 4, you see that the one with the blue color or the black, it is actually that of a tablet, and this is the existing product that the sponsor marketed. They look at the oral thin film in 2 ways. First of all, applying the drug, just putting it on the tongue and allow it to dissolve just like normal. And then the second route is the dark green color, which is an OTF, and they put it under the tongue. Now, for those of you who know transmucosal absorption, you know that sublingual route tends to act faster than that of the GI. So this is particularly curious for all of us, and it's kind of like falling outside the rule. So we kind of look at it with the sponsor in a bit more detail. And moving on to the next slide. So this is kind of like the dose that was being administered. So if you look at the tablet of 5 milligram, the oral thin film that was placed in the tongue is 5 milligram, and also in that of the sublingual route is also 5 milligram. The one thing that the sponsor kind of picked up is for the sublingual tablet, they actually find a small pulp, and I think this is something to do with the clinical design. So there was an undissolved amount of about 3.5 milligram in the pulp that was actually not delivered. So if you factor that, is only 1.5 milligram that was actually delivered. And if you look at the AUC of the two OTF applications relative to that of a tablet, you can see that the lingual application was actually superior, and the AUC is much, much more at 177%. And if you look at the graph itself, the sublingual route only offer about 75% of that of the tablet. However, if you dose adjust it to the 1.5 milligram, the sublingual route was far, far superior in delivering around about 220% to that of the tablet reference product itself. So this is a great example of the different delivering in different sites and giving you the opportunity to look at how fast and how slow and some of the intricacies of delivering the oral thin film in real applications. So finally, with case study 5, just to give you a sense of some of the formulation challenges, one of the key things with oral thin film is the challenge of recrystallization of the API. I talk about some of the formulations could be a solution form or amorphous form, and of course, if you have it in the amorphous form, you expect it to be faster onset of action. But there is a downside to that is, it depends on the drug solubility itself, and sometimes it precipitates out. So if you look at the left-hand side of the picture, this is a 4 milligram API deliver, and you see the lumen of the polymers. They are fairly clear, and some of those, one of the yellow-orange spot on the left, and that's actually undissolved polymer. So you see a few of those on the slide. And when we increase the dose from 8 milligram to the loading to 8 milligram, you see the lumen starting to kind of congested, and then that's where the drug starting to crystallize out. And that obviously is an undesirable effect. What we have done with this particular API was to change the polymer platform. And you see on the right-hand side is instead of using HPMC, we use the methacrylate copolymer. And you see the inset, essentially the drugs are all dissolved in the polymer matrix. And this is a very important aspect when we come to the formulation of oral thin films. How do you strike the balance of maintaining the product in solution or in crystal form without recrystallization and also the growth of crystals from your suspended particles? So this is a great illustration. As I said, the physical chemical characteristics of the drugs are, you can see that this is a highly insoluble compound, very lipophilic, and fairly large molecule as well. So this is a great example of the use of the optimum choice of the polymer as a platform for the formulation. So I hope in the last 45 minutes we've given you a quick tour with regard to the oral thin film and the transmucosal delivery in terms of demonstrating to you about the possibility of improving the bioavailability and then also reducing the dose, mainly for those drugs which have a hepatic first pass, certainly is a real consideration. It really is possible to achieve fast onset of action, both real and perceived, and this is particularly important because, as we all know, placebo plays a very important part in any medication. For those who have been in pain management, the placebo effect is huge. So the fact that some of the dose form dissolves rapidly can often lead to a more positive outcome to that of a patient. Finally, is really that you can modulate the PK profile. So again, there is a lot of opportunities to move to formulate an OTF as a real alternative to your API. To tablet dose form for your API. So I think there is an opportunity here for life cycle management of your product, and at the same time for those who work on NCEs, and I know people, the first thing that we do always go to the tablet because this is trial and trusted, we all know about it, but I would ask you to stretch your imagination, understand more about the OTF, and see how you may find this dose form as a way of delivering the promise that your drug could deliver. And at the same time, this innovative dose form offers you real market differentiation. So that's all I have, and so I would invite you to have questions, and I think Rachel is going to chair that session.
Thank you very much, Rick. So thank you to everyone who has already sent their questions in. I know we have had a lot of questions in. So please continue to send in your questions via the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen, or please use the top left-hand box. We will try and get through as many of the questions as possible. However, if we do not have time to answer them all in this webinar, then Iris or Rick will get back to you at a later date. So for your first question, why choose sublingual over transbuccal?
This is very much to do with the structure of the oral cavity. The sublingual is highly vascularized, so and also the amount of epithelial cells are actually thinner than that of the buccal cavity. So if you look at the non-keratinized, you're talking typically about 40, 50 cell layer thick. Sublinguals varies to about half that amount. So from a diffusion point of view, there is an advantage, and that is also one of the reasons why sublingual delivers drugs faster when all things are equal.
Thank you very much. And what are the limitations of the drug loading with the films?
Good question. Typically, we would say this. You would go for about between 30 to 40% of the weight of the wafer. Again, bear in mind we need consideration about the solubility and how you design the dose form. So typically, I would say this is about 30 to 40% of the weight of the wafer. So I would go for 25 milligram is a very comfortable range for what I call a typical wafer of 7 square centimeter. But if you increase the size of the wafer, you can increase the loading of the drug. So 30 milligram to 40 milligram is a real possibility if you are prepared to compromise some of the other attributes, like the quick dissolving aspects. So there are multiple ways to achieve that.
Thank you. And is transmucosal delivery a barrier to large molecules such as immunoglobulins?
Absolutely, because just like skin, the buccal cavity and all these are designed to prevent materials going through. So what we're doing is actually trying to find a clever way of making the drug molecule to move across. And I talked earlier on about the molecular size being important. Certainly, something like nicotine with a very small, with about 212 molecular weight is a much smaller molecule than any of your peptides. For instance, insulin, which is about 13 to 14,000 daltons. So there's obviously a challenge there.
Thank you. And is Multipack packaging accepted for pharma products?
I would say so. I like to understand why people don't think that it is not acceptable presentation. It is no different from having a bottle with 30 or 90 tablets in there. So when I say that, I put a caveat. You need to have accurate dosing, and you need to have a perforated or serrated oral thin film with the multiple pack to cut it off.
Thank you. And can you elaborate further on faster onset OTF examples on the market?
At the moment, I don't see any of those that are fast-acting. I think they're designed for a very specific reason. So in terms of real pharmacokinetics, I don't see that. I haven't seen one yet, put it this way. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for it. A lot depends on, I think one of the reasons why people have not gone for it is because of the registration process, and also because potentially when you put a claim of faster onset, you now potentially move away from the bioequivalency of the product, and it just presents additional challenges from a registration point of view. But to me, that's more of a marketing strategy than against technology limitation.
Thank you very much. And what kind of polymers are used for extended release?
Typically, it's the insoluble polymers, so you can think about the HPC along those lines. And high molecular HPMC as well. A lot depends on the system design.
Thank you. And are there any challenges with respect to formulating heat-labile molecules?
Of course, I talked about that. Most of the most common processing is the heat drying. So yes, that presents a challenge. A lot depends on how you do it. Let me give an example. So for those people who are familiar with making tablets, ibuprofen has a sublimation point about 38 degrees C. So how do you dry the granules coming out from ibuprofen? So is this similar approach? How do you exercise care and process control to actually make sure that your heat-labile substances do not degrade?
Thank you. And for poor permeability compound, is it possible or promising to use permeation enhancer or bioadhesives to significantly enable the transmucosal delivery?
I think that's a great question. Certainly, I did not talk about it in the webinar, but certainly permeation enhancer plays a key role for some of those poorly permeable products, and a lot depends also with the types of transport, and that's where I talk about both the transcellular and the paracellular, and depends on which route and the lipophilicity of the drug, you need to use different types of permeation enhancers to maximize the permeability diffusion.
Thank you. And what is the maximum resistance time of mucoadhesive buccal film in the mouth?
I don't have an answer for that. I think a lot of this will be very much depend on the API itself. Let me get a crazy example. For instance, if you were to formulate a capsaicin API, oral thin film, I am pretty sure you won't be tolerated for too long in the buccal cavity, because you will start to have edema and erythema very, very quickly. So the API plays a very, very key role in terms of how it induces the sensitivity. And secondly depends on how you design a system. Is it going to be occlusive or going to be semi-occlusive? And what is the amount of salivary that would be allowed to move across the surface of the buccal cavity? Because don't forget, when you are doing the control release, you have a high concentration of drug at one spot. So a lot of factors play into that. I don't know what would be the appropriate time in terms of inducing that, because that is very API dependent. But just to add on to that point, Rachel, OnSalis actually advise people to have the application time for about 30 minutes. So again, with buprenorphine, it is, people cannot tolerate it for 30 minutes. So obviously that is also acceptable to the patients from a patient's point of view. So just bear in mind your API, your system design will be a key factor.
Thank you. And do you control the temperature and moisture of the room, or do you just record it?
Sorry, I missed that, Rachel.
Sorry.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, of course. Do you control the temperature and moisture of the room, or do you just record it?
Well, it depends on when you do the work. When you're doing the laboratory work, you record it, and is like the normal practice. Give you the best information. So if ever something didn't quite, the result didn't quite turn out what you expect, at least you can refer back to the conditions. Sometimes in extreme conditions, it does affect the performance of the formulated products. So I would just call it as a good scientific approach of how you do that.
Thank you. And methacrylate copolymers, if used, do not give fast dissolving films. Does that mean we can't use it for fast dissolving film?
Well, not necessarily. I talk about it in terms of whether it is real or perceived. So the design becomes very important in terms of the nature of application. So, you might have something that does not dissolve immediately, but on the other hand, if it breaks up, and I'm using this as an example, if it breaks up, the patient may not be aware that it actually does not dissolve. So it offers a perception that the drug, that the oral thin film is fast acting, but it may not be. It may be orally ingested and absorbed through the GI tract. So it is important in terms of differentiating what your key objectives in terms of formulation is.
Thank you very much. And sadly, this is going to have to be our last question for today. So what is the maximum size a typical patient should take?
Typical size, what do you mean? I think I talked about, like, for instance, most common sizes around about 7 square centimeter. So that's kind of like a typical size, but it can vary, depends on the application, and you can increase that. But I would say a 10 square centimeter OTF would be probably the maximum size. But on the other hand, on the lower end, you need to be able to pick it up and pull it out from the pouches. So there are considerations in terms of handling as well.
Thank you very much, Rick. So sadly, that is all we have time for in today's session. So if we didn't get around to answering your question, then Rick or Iris will get back to you at a later date. So that just leaves me to thank Rick and Iris for what was a great presentation, and thanks to LTS Lohmann Therapie-Systemes for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, you will receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access this through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned and follow us on Twitter @BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. So thank you once again to everyone, and I hope you all have a nice day.